Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a firsthand account that is equal parts fascinating and, honestly, deeply unsettling. We're going to analytically break down an event from October of 2022 that perfectly illustrates what happens when the totally mundane collides with the downright inexplicable. Our subject today is a 19-year-old named Caleb, and we're going to use the details of his exact experience to reconstruct a timeline that will absolutely have you on the edge of your seat. So let's get right into it. 3 nights alone on a remote cattle farm. I want you to just take a second and really imagine stepping into Caleb's shoes with that premise. You're 19, you've been tasked with overseeing this massive piece of property entirely by yourself. The wind is howling, the nights are pitch black, and the nearest town literally feels like it's on another planet. I mean, it sounds like the setup to a classic campfire story, right? But what we're analyzing today is a documented real-world account. And as you'll see, it brilliantly highlights how isolation plays a crucial role in the events that are about to unfold. All right, let's set the stage with Section 1, the remote Montana farm. So, let's establish our baseline context. Caleb's uncle, who normally handles the grueling day-to-day operations of this property, had to head out of state for a livestock auction, leaving his 19-year-old nephew in charge of the whole shebang. And the sheer scale of the geography Caleb was left to manage is immense. We aren't talking about a small backyard plot here. This is a massive operation located in northern Montana. We're looking at hundreds of acres of sprawling land. Structurally, the property features 2 large barns, several expansive fenced pastures, a dense cornfield, and this long, isolated gravel road leading up to the main house. Keep this physical layout in your mental map, because understanding the vastness of these spaces and the blind spots they create, especially that dense cornfield, is absolutely vital for understanding the anomaly that hits later. And this number, right here, this really brings the reality of Caleb's situation into sharp focus. 4. The nearest neighbor to this property lived almost 4 miles away. To put that isolation into perspective, in rural counties like this, the average police response time can often stretch over 30 minutes to an hour. A 4-mile buffer means you are entirely on your own. There's no quick help, no neighbor to hear a shout. It is profound, absolute isolation. Moving on to Section 2, 2 days of normalcy. Before the storm hits, we really have to look at how Caleb developed this completely false sense of security. Because for a 19-year-old, this gig seemed like incredibly easy money. And honestly, for the first 48 hours, the data perfectly supported that. The routine was highly predictable and rigorously structured. Step 1, feed the cattle. Step 2, walk the perimeter and check the fences. Step 3, lock up the barns for the night. Done. It was a repetitive, totally predictable loop of agricultural chores, and Caleb nailed it without a single hitch. So the absolutely crucial point we need to take away from those first 2 days is this. They were completely, utterly normal. There were no strange visitors pulling up that long gravel road, no weird sounds echoing from the cornfield, nothing whatsoever to indicate anything was out of the ordinary. And psychologically, this is so important to note. When your environment is that predictable, your guard drops. Caleb was comfortable. The baseline of normalcy had been firmly established. Which brings us right into Section 3, the third night. Our narrative arc takes a very sharp, very dark turn right here, 9:30 p.m. We are marking this exact timestamp because this is the precise moment the timeline completely fractures. Everything before 9:30 p.m. was mundane. Everything after 9:30 p.m. completely defies logical explanation. Let's set the sensory stage right before the anomaly strikes. Just imagine the highly immersive environment Caleb is sitting in. He's inside the main house, sitting in the kitchen, casually eating some leftover chili. He's disconnected from the outside world, just scrolling through videos on his phone. But outside, the environmental conditions are shifting. Rain clouds are drifting heavily across the sky, and the moon is disappearing intermittently behind them. Because of this changing weather pattern, the farm is cloaked in a darkness that is much deeper and heavier than those previous 2 nights. The succession of events that followed was incredibly rapid. At 9:30 p.m., it's just a normal routine. But moments later, the biological alarms on the farm go off. The cattle, literally every single one of them, erupt into a simultaneous panic. And shortly after that, the farm dogs react. But notice how they react. They don't just bark. Barking is a standard territorial response. Instead, they stop barking entirely and begin this low, sustained growl directed right toward the fence line. In animal behavioral terms, a dog shifting from a bark to a targeted growl signifies they aren't just alerting to a presence, they are actively perceiving a direct, immediate threat. Caleb's own account captures the sheer scale of this disruption perfectly. He said the sound rolled across the property like an alarm. Think about the decibel level of an entire herd of cattle mooing and thrashing in sheer terror, all at the exact same time. The sudden, violent eruption of noise was so startling that Caleb literally almost dropped his phone. It jolted him right out of his modern distraction and forced him to instantly engage with his physical environment. He stood straight up and moved directly to the kitchen window. From that kitchen window, he had a direct line of sight to the northern pasture, and he gets immediate visual confirmation of the auditory chaos. This massive herd of cattle isn't just making noise, they are physically agitated, moving nervously, shifting and pacing around in the dark. The tension in that moment is just palpable. Caleb knows something is out there, causing this massive disturbance, but he's safely inside the house. Now, given the rural location and the extreme animal reaction, Caleb's brain immediately calculated the most highly probable cause, right? A predator. A coyote, maybe a mountain lion, stalking the fence line. It makes perfect logical sense. But his assumption was completely wrong. The source of the panic wasn't wildlife at all. It was a group of masked figures. Human beings actively concealing their identities, trespassing on an isolated farm in the dead of night. That brings us to our final act, Section 4, the unsolved mystery. This is where we transition into the climax and the chilling aftermath of that night. Let's systematically break down the specific objective anomalies Caleb uncovered before the sun finally came up. First, he found clear evidence that he had been secretly watched. And think about what that implies. Premeditation. Whoever was out there had been actively observing his routines, waiting for the dark, waiting for the isolation. Second, there were strange whistles echoing out from the dense cornfield. Analytically speaking, a whistle is a tool for coordination. It means this wasn't just some single wanderer. This was a group communicating with one another in the dark, using that massive cornfield as cover. And finally, the ultimate visual confirmation. Masked figures simply standing in the darkness, staring right back at him. So, what is the final outcome of this harrowing account? Well, step 1, a formal police investigation was launched. Law enforcement arrived, swept the massive property, and took all the reports. But despite the involvement of authorities, we arrive at step 2. The event remains an entirely unexplained mystery. No suspects were apprehended, no motives were uncovered. The figures simply melted back into the rural Montana landscape. Which leaves us with step 3, a lingering, terrifying secret that haunts Caleb to this very day. A permanent fracture in his sense of safety. Which brings us to the final, unsettling question that we really have to ask ourselves as we wrap up this explainer. What were they watching and why? Were they there for the cattle? Were they there for the property? Or were they, for some completely inexplicable reason, there specifically for Caleb? It appeals to our most primal human fears, the idea of being observed in our most vulnerable, isolated moments by an unknown entity with unknown intentions. It's a question that just doesn't have an answer. And honestly, that's exactly what makes the remote Montana farm mystery so profoundly chilling. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep analyzing the facts, and I'll catch you next time.